silly of me, I forgot. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can just click off that or whatever. So, whoops, thank you. All right. So Parshat Korah. For those that were here a little bit earlier, I shared with you one of the daily prayers that we're supposed to incorporate into our lives. And if you missed that, you can go back to page, I think it was 66, the page that leads right to the first Shema, and take a look at that paragraph. The other thing that I would encourage you to do, if you haven't had a chance to do so already, take a look at the Torah study sheet from this week. That incorporates a number of the different commentaries that were presented with this one. But there is an awful lot going on in this. And I think, at least for me, I found that it was real tough to kind of separate out what way we should be going. You know, when is dissent appropriate? When is it not as appropriate? How is that dissent done? Is it for personal achievement? Is it for the good of the community? And I couldn't help but thinking about all the things that have been going on, not only here in over the last year here in the US, with all the racial discord and disharmony and all the politics, no matter which side you're on, the divisive politics, and in Israel, something either amazing or something that's going to completely blow up in our faces, essentially, starts tomorrow. I believe the election will be ratified, or however they do it, tomorrow. But I don't really have a good answer as to what constitutes legitimate dissent versus, for lack of a better word, illegitimate dissent. So I found a couple of commentaries from today's Torah portion that might set the stage for some further discussion here. So in the Chumash, the Eight Sky, on page 861, it says, Yeshayahu Leibowitz sees Korach's demagoguery exposed in his claim that all the community are holy. We've achieved our goal and nothing more be demanded of us. The Torah's position is that all the community is challenged to become holy. It's a future goal, not a present boast. Leibowitz interprets the words of the Torah several chapters later. The sons of Korach did not die, to mean that such people exist in every generation, claiming that just by being Jewish means that they are already as close to God as they have to be. True messengers present themselves as unworthy of the task, as Moses did at the burning bush. Only persons motivated by self-interest, eager for the position of leader, proclaim, I can do it better. And that's according to, I believe it was Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. So on the next page, we see that Moses sent for Dathan and Abiram. So this is at the bottom of page 862. Here we see the greatness of Moses's soul. He set aside his own dignity and his feelings of resentment towards those who spoke ill of him and took the initiative to heal this breach in the community. And then we're told that the whole community should withdraw from about their abodes. The Israelites were in a dangerous situation, characteristic of many people this day. They did not agree with Korach, but neither did they actively oppose him. They stood aside to see how things would turn out. And that's from Nechama Leibowitz after the great sage Malbim. That's why Moses has to urge them to distance themselves from Korah and his followers, lest they be caught up in the latter's punishment, suffering the deserved fate of the bystander who does nothing to stop evil, and perhaps even hopes to benefit from it. It would seem that Moses is showing the strain of having to deal with one episode of complaint and faithlessness after another. With each successive incident, Moses becomes more short-tempered with the people he is purported to be leading. The world exists on account of people who are able to restrain themselves during a quarrel, and that's from the Babylonian Talmud. Korah and his followers were not able to do that, so the earth gave way and swallowed them, from Simcha Bunam. The earthquake that swallowed Korah vindicated Moses as God's choice to be Israel's leader. The tribe of Reuben, however, was still challenging Aaron and the Levites. Here we see the contrasting personalities of Moses and Aaron. Moses destroys his opponents, calling down a divine miracle to bury them alive. Aaron disarms his rivals by outproducing them. His staff sends forth sprouts and blossoms, whereas the staffs of the other tribes cannot flower. Moses is the voice of justice. Aaron is the pursuer of peace. So again, this is like the fourth collision course that the Israelites have experienced since they left Egypt. So I'm curious, just on a little bit of an anecdotal type poll, how many feel that Korah was appropriately dissenting? Let's start with that one. How many feel that Korah was appropriately dissenting? All right, Bill? Yeah? All right. How many feel that Moses and Aaron were in the right, and God, the way they looked at the situation and the way it turned out? Bill again. Okay. So I see some ambivalence here.
No, I don't think. I think it's God who swallowed them up. It wasn't Moses. Moses was angry, right? That they were dissenting, but didn't Moses send Aaron to try to save the people from God's wrath?
Yes,
From swallowing them up.
Right.
I think God lost control.
okay, that's an interesting take. Rick, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just trying to articulate what it is that I'm trying to say. Dissent to should be discussed in private with the leaders, and also criticism of someone's performance from the leader should be private. It should not be public. I was thinking there was a scene from Miracle on Ice with the U.S. Olympic hockey team, and there was the captain, Mike Eruzione, and the coach had this interesting thing. He said he would criticize this person, but he would sometimes call him Mike, and he would sometimes call him Eruzione, and he told him, when I call you by one of them, it's a personal criticism. When I call you by the other, I'm doing it to rally the team.
Interesting. Okay. So if you think that Korah was in the right, he had legitimate dissent and legitimate gripes. I guess the biggest question is, how do you separate it out? What's right and what's wrong? I mean, all of us go through conflicts in our daily lives that we have to face, and we have to face it one way or the other. When countries go through this period of tension, if you want to call it that, it's much more difficult for a country to kind of figure out what's the right path for the country. And you'll find people on, pardon the pun, both sides of the aisle that are absolutely 100% convinced that they are on the right track. And I know that the Talmud teaches us that we should try and find arguments for the other side. And I think that in Talmudic debate, you had to be able to argue something from, quote, 49 different perspectives. In other words, trying to find every nuance as to what makes one side right or the other side right, or which is the more correct opinion, so to speak. Needless to say, this is a huge struggle. And if you think back to some of the struggles that you have faced in your own lives, in hindsight, if you look back on those struggles today, would you still put yourself that you were on the right side of that argument? Or would you put yourself in the position that, you know, I think I made a mistake that time and I probably could have done something maybe a little bit differently?
Well, that's easy in my case because I never make a mistake. So it's obvious if there's an argument that I'm in the right.
So I don't know. Has anybody else looked back on something and said that they would have wished they would have done something differently based on how things turned out in the long run?
Wouldn't it make more sense to ask, has anyone not, besides me, has anyone not regretted something that he or she has done, or many things?
Okay,
Well,
I think that's actually a pretty fair question, Bill. Is there anybody that feels that all the decisions that they've made in their lives have been the best decision that they could have made? Jill, come on up. Yep, go ahead.
So different in person. What I was going to say is I try to view it as I made the decision I made at the time with the information I had at that time and what I thought would be the best at that time. And I think we always say hindsight is 20/20 because we didn't have the same information when we had to make the decision as we have now. So I think all we can try to do is at the time you have to make a big decision is try to lay out all the arguments on a path forward and then choose the one that we think will work best for us and then hope for the best.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good assessment. In fact, one of the commentaries that I read, and there were a lot of commentaries on this, one of the commentaries that I read was that, you know, maybe before we make a decision, that Bill was just suggesting, that take a minute, take a breath, stop and think about what it is that we're doing, and think about whether or not this is the right decision. I mean, obviously, there are some emergency situations where you have to make an immediate decision and you don't necessarily have time to think about it, you know. And that was a good example of that was just this past week, the police officer in Worcester who saw somebody drowning in the lake, went in to go try and save him. And unfortunately, because of the current and, you know, he was completely with all his full clothing on, didn't stop to take it off. And unfortunately, both lost their lives. But he still made the effort, you know, so do we have the luxury sometimes of standing by and watching what's taking place? Not always. If we have that extra time that we can think about a particular decision, I think it behooves us all that we take that minute or 2 minutes to think about which fork in the road are we going down? What are the consequences if we go down this way or if we go down that way? So just to kind of close it out, I want to share with you one commentary that particularly struck me. And this is by Rabbi Rachel Cowan. And I don't know what her affiliation is. I'm just looking to see if I can find it. I got this from the My Jewish Learning site, and she entitles it, "The Power Struggle." What a dramatic power struggle we've just witnessed in this Torah portion. A cabal of influential rebels tries to take power from Moses, daring to risk their lives to promote their own self-interest over the sacred destiny of their people. Their downfall is stark and dreadful. Yet the Torah teaches, even though Korach dies, his descendants live on. We certainly see them today. Cynical political, religious, communal leaders, cloaking self-interest in the language of democracy, nationalism, or even God. In wielding power in such short-sighted ways, these modern-day rebels present an even greater threat to God's creation than Korach did to Moses' leadership. This Torah portion urges us to be vigilant, lest such persons undermine the communities that we are called to create and to sustain. But it's not only public leaders who play Korach's role today. We too will live with an ongoing conflict between the inner Moses and the inner Korach, between humility and arrogance, between selflessness and selfishness. And until we can hear the difference between those two voices, our actions will not be effective in countering the power of the Korachs at large in the world. We need to be clear when it's the voice of our needy, small-minded self that advises us to act, or when it's the wise voice that speaks from our deepest and best values and truth. We need a practice of reflection to discern which voice is guiding us. Happily, we can also find some guidance in this Torah portion. In our tradition, Moses is seen as humility embodied, the true servant of God. The famous commentator, the Safat Emet, a 19th century Hasidic master, understood Moses being so far from pride in his bearing that people could not fathom his modesty. In Parshat Korach, we see Moses in that place of humility, able to lead because he loves God and the Israelites with every fiber of his being, despite his constant frustration with both of them. Twice he falls on his face, before Korach and before God, trying to stop the rebellion and to prevent God from destroying the persistently disobedient Israelites. Moses acts from the deep understanding that Korach's challenge has nothing to do with him. It's a challenge to God. He knows himself to be just the vessel through which God's vision for the Israelites could become manifested, not the man who has to prove himself superior to an insolent competitor. Throughout the journeys of the Israelites, we see Moses grow as a spiritual leader, from a reluctant young man who struggles with anger and lack of self-confidence to become the quintessential leader, one who was able to overcome his own ego in order to preserve a much greater cause. Finally, he becomes one who accepts God's decision that he will die and that he will die outside the land of Israel. Korach is different. His challenge to Moses is rooted in personal ambition, not love of God or of the Israelites. Unlike Moses, who hesitated to take that leadership that God offered, Korach seeks to grab it for himself. If you look at the first word of the opening of the portion, literally, and Korach took, to mean that he took himself apart from the people. Korach would have nothing to do to stop God from destroying the Israelites, because he would have loved to be the sire of a whole new people. Unlike Moses, going on here? Okay. Korach sees the whole story as being about himself and the role he wants to play as a powerful chief priest. Reading this Torah portion, I ask, how do I recognize Korach in my own thoughts and actions? And how do I liberate the consciousness that Moses had? And this is in Rabbi Cohen's position as director of a wonderful nonprofit institute. I find that Korach seems to pop up most frequently when I am afraid. What if I don't succeed at raising enough money? What if I don't succeed at making our work known? What if I'm not good enough? What if this work fails because of my incompetence? In such moments of doubt, I make myself the central actor on stage, starring in The Tragedy of Rachel Cowan, that is. In that place of fear, I separate myself from the community doing the work, and I clutch for some way to feel in control. I can't see the whole. There is no way to make wise decisions. But if I make time like Moses to fall on my face, to breathe, to reflect, I can hear the I, in quotes, shouting out in all its grandiosity. I reply, Rav Lacha, enough of this, Korach, acknowledging that once again I have made the story about me and my fears. In that space, Moses can emerge and call me back to humility, to the recognition that I, like everybody else, am but a bit player on this stage. I can rekindle the trust that I have in the wisdom of the unfolding of the work and in the wisdom of my colleagues to figure out what will flow from this moment. The Korach in all of us gets triggered by different emotions: fear, anger, anxiety, greed, or doubt. When this happens, we lose sight of the whole and we become caught up in our own inner dramas. Our needs eclipse the needs of others. Moses's path and ours is to move from the narrow place of doubt, fear, anger, and jealousy to an expansive, covenanted life in a community of mutual care and responsibility. In such a community, all people are holy. We can remind each other that what matters most is not the ambition of the self, but the work of helping to make the soul, the home, the office, the world, a safer and wiser, more compassionate place for all. Such a perspective helps each of us to come closer to being a humble servant of God. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Yasher Koach.
Baruch Tiyah. So we'll